the fourth session of the day, which is in the format of a panel. Since the very beginning of the 21st century, we've been discussing about the various kinds of divides. We've talked about resource divide, we've talked about information divide, and the pandemic only exemplified the digital divide that exists. So one is to carefully introspect at the heart of all these various kinds of divide is the knowledge divide. And this divide comes from the fact that production and dissemination of knowledge is heavily concentrated in only certain regions of the world, while the consumption of this knowledge occurs on the other quantum of the globe. So knowledge is generally produced in the global north, while the reception of it happens in the global south. And these, let's say, asymmetries and imbalances in the global knowledge architecture has become all the more relevant, I would say rather more acute, with the race for global rankings, research grants, publications, and many more. So for the next 1 hour, this panel with distinguished scholars and experts will attempt to unearth this knowledge divide, especially in the context of India and Europe. But let me, before begin, with a small disclaimer here that while this panel was initially designed to include experts from both India and Europe, however, for some reasons, our European colleagues could not join us today. So we would like to reserve more time. And so here in this panel, of course, what we're going to get is present the Indian experiences with these asymmetries and imbalances. So I would obviously urge all my European colleagues and friends to send in your questions for the Q&A that we've reserved, especially for all of them who are not able to join us in this panel. On this very happy note, let me also say that we are happy that key officials from the Association of European Studies in India, with whom this event is jointly organized, are also present with me as panel members. So let me quickly introduce all my panel members. First, we start with Professor Shantanu Chakrabarti, who is the professor at the Department of History, Calcutta University, and he's also the president of AESI. We also have with us, very happy to have with us, Mr. Sanjeev Roy, who is a senior key expert on higher education for the EU Public Diplomacy Project in India, led by the delegation of European Union to India and Bhutan. We also have Professor Jayaraj Amin, who is professor and chairman of the Department of Political Science at Mangalore University, and he's also the vice president of AESI. He also holds a Jean Monnet module and has coordinated various academic exchange programs by the European Commission. Finally, we also have Professor Sudarsan Padmanabhan, who is Associate Professor of Political Philosophy in the Department of Humanities and Social Science at IIT Madras. He's also the treasurer of AESI. And with this very brief introductions, let me now quickly let you know the format of the panel. So for the next 1 hour, the panel is divided into 2 rounds. So the very first round, I'm going to specifically ask each of my panels with specific questions. Each one of them have very specific questions. And I request all panel members to provide your intervention in 8 minutes. After which we will go to the second round, where I will throw in, let's say, an open generic question to each one and invite all my panel members to pitch in, engage, of course, in discussion with each other. So let me begin first with Professor Shantanu. Shantanu, sir, you are an historian, and that's why first, of course, when we talk about knowledge flows, we see that the most important players are, of course, the knowledge seeker, and seekers in the form of students, in the form of researchers, in the form of scholars. Now, if you look at, we're very well aware that there have been mobility or movement of these scholars from India to Europe, from Europe to India. And of course, there are various accounts or efforts made to capture knowledge in these regions. So can you probably enumerate a bit on the direction of the flow of these scholars between India to Europe historically? Of course, we'll start with the historical overview of the mobility of scholars and how they have shaped the entire knowledge architecture between India and Europe, and then move on to other panel members. Over to you, Shantanu, sir.
Thank you, and it's nice to be here discussing some of these issues. Knowledge production or its dissemination, as we know, while talking about it, if you look at the theoretical dimensions at which some of these things are discussed, I'm often reminded, since since you mentioned I'm a student of history, let me begin with a historical example. You have this fascinating book by a Dutch historian, Johan Huizinga, who it's called The Waning of the Middle Ages. He was talking about how the tradition of chivalry, etc., died out in Europe. And while concluding, he said, was it all in vain? Was it just a fanciful idea? Whereas in reality, it was a medieval Europe, in spite of all its notions of chivalry, its chivalric code, all that literature, the reality was battles, death, destruction, and pillage. And he concludes by saying, it's just like an archer trying to aim at a target. When you try to aim at a target, you usually aim higher than the target because your arrow is going to go down. During its flight. That's what. Hello.
Yeah, please go ahead, Shantanu.
Yeah. So as that sort of a thing. When you look at all the theoretical descriptions and construction of knowledge building, etc., it has been like that. There is, of course, building of, if you look at how knowledge was disseminated, how what was the essential purpose for which institutions engaged in dissemination of knowledge. Universities came, you also had indigenous traditions. There was, of course, this moral obligations as well as this philanthropic attitude. But on the other hand, if you look at it realistically, knowledge production and its dissemination has always been associated with power centers. As a result of which, when you look at people engaged in such, in the learning process or dissemination, and if you look at it in terms of, as you ask people traveling across the borders, it usually has been from, it has been mostly in one direction. And that's because of the way, particularly in our case, in case of India, it has particularly has been because of our colonial tradition. But then also, if you look at Indians, students, scholars moving into the West, it has been largely to universities based in the Anglo-European world. You have very rare cases of Indians going elsewhere. There were opportunities, and there have been some scholars who have been engaged with this, this other European world also. Offhand, since you want me to talk more, to give you more historical examples, during early 20th century, for instance, they developed joint research between groups of Indian linguists as well as European linguists, particularly stationed in several Eurasian areas, including there was this very famous Lithuanian scholar, Anastas Poshka, who was a bit of adventurer himself, and he traveled from Lithuania. He came to India during 1930s riding a motorbike. He came through on a motorbike up to Persian Gulf, and from there he took a ship into Mumbai. From Mumbai again on a motorbike, he came to India. He studied in Mumbai. Then it was Bombay University. He studied in Calcutta University. He goes to Shantiniketan, tries to learn Bengali language, and all this time throughout 1930s, he engages with a large number of Indian scholars working on similarity in Indo-European languages. This person, unfortunately, goes back to Lithuania after the end of the Second World War. By that time, it had come under Soviet control, and he, couldn't finish his PhD because this person was thrown in Siberia. To be released much later. You have another example from this side also. Let's talk of a person like Hiranmay Ghoshal, another Indian scholar from Calcutta. He follows the typical path. He goes to London, again, a linguist and a person who did his PhD on drama of Anton Chekhov. He knew 6 to 7 languages, including Russian and Polish, but decides not to stay back or to get a job in in a university located in Britain, but he moves and starts teaching in University of Warsaw back in 1935. This person is important in our Indian history because he is stationed in Warsaw when Second World War begins, and Warsaw is taken over by Germans in 1939, and writes perhaps the only Indian eyewitness account of about the fall of Warsaw in Bengali, which it's a fascinating story how he tries to escape from Warsaw on foot, along with his Polish girlfriend. Once again, comes back as he learns that Soviet Union had joined the struggle. Later manages to come back to India. This account is written in 1941. He later, joins Indian embassy in Moscow between 1947 to 51 and gets dismissed under mysterious circumstances. I'm currently working on some of his unpublished diaries. And if you look at his approach, it's a fascinating story. He questions the Indian approach that why did we, after independence, decided to continue with the Commonwealth when we had so much rich heritage, our linkages with other European countries in Central and Eastern Europe. So you do have these examples, but yes, because of our colonial tradition, because of the essential hegemonic structure of knowledge building and knowledge dissemination, much of our movement, has been more towards Anglo-centric universities rather than these other parts of European universities.
Thank you, Shantanu, sir. Two things that I really found interesting that you mentioned. One is you brought in the relation between and how knowledge is power-centric. So you bring out here the relationship between knowledge and power. Of course, I'm going to come to that with another of my panel members where we're going to explore that particular dimension a little more in detail. But the second thing that you highlighted here was how this flow or this the mobility of scholars, of knowledge seeker is unidirectional in nature. All right. Taking that particular, let's say, argument forward, I would like to invite Mr. Sanjeev Roy. If you straight away jump to the contemporary times, to the present times, and if you look at the, again, you examine the flow of students, researchers between India and European Union, you could also see that there seems to be, this direction, this unidirectionality continues to exist, where we have had, or we continue to have, more Indian students, researchers going to Europe, for pursuing their research, while very few Europeans coming here. And the numbers speak for themselves. Just have to give you a few numbers, few statistics here, but I know that you are the person with all the numbers. If you look at under the Marie Curie, let's say, scholarship program funded under the Horizon 2020, and this is the data from 2014 to 2020, we see that there have been more than 1,300 Indian students who have gone to Europe to pursue their study and research. While on the other hand, if you look at this another scheme, and again EU funded, that's Research and Innovation Staff Exchange, only 28 European researchers came to India. So you can see this divide that exists. And this brings us to the question of reciprocity. Why have we not able to reciprocate in a similar manner? So could you probably present your views or maybe counter what I've just said probably? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Priya. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Professor Shantanu. Nice hearing from you, and good to have this historical perspective. Good friend, good evening, Sudarsan. Seeing you after a long time. Professor Jayaraj, Amin, we have interacted but not met yet, but good to be in this virtual world. So, Priya, very interesting question you asked, that it's a one-way traffic. And, there's no rocket science, because jumping from where Professor Shantanu left, even he made me think, what was it India before the independence? That scholars were coming all the way to Shantiniketan to do the research. They have gone to Patna University. I've met many people from Cambridge who have come to Patna University. Even Patna University, and even today, if you ask, I don't know the stats, I don't think even a single person from Europe who even think of going to Patna University. So what is this that has happened? We all need to answer ourselves. Because, well, of course, I represent the European Union here. And see, now let's look at the history. Europe and India, the diplomatic relations began in 1960s, which got sealed in 1983 with the opening of the delegation of European Union office in Delhi. And then we have been having all these summits, like Priya, what you said about Marie Curie, scholars coming from Europe to India is 28 and vice versa, is because of the summit where we had a strategic partnership in 2004. I'll focus only on education and science, right? So in 2004, let's look at the number, even from the European perspective. Something talked about mindset, Commonwealth thing. Now, see, if you look at Europe as a continent today with 27 member states, when you look at a country like India, who traditionally has been sending students to US, to UK, to Australia, which are the number of students who have come from these English-speaking countries to India? You can count on fingers. So now to expect Europe, which is a bouquet of 25, 27, 30 languages, these students to come to India, where I'll come to it later on, where we're not talking of the university infrastructure, where we're not talking of language as a means, the awareness of it, because I'm talking from the practitioner point of view totally. If you go to Europe till today, all of us have traveled across the world. I was a student in UK. Even students in UK would that time knew about Goa as a destination. Their parents would know about Taj Mahal. But when I went to Europe, neither Goa was present nor Taj Mahal was present. So what is that which was missing? So European Union has done a lot. So in 2004, the journey has begun. Now in 2004, if you look at the Erasmus, very good example. In 2004, there were about 1,100 Erasmus students and scholars from across India who had been to Europe, right? Today, that number is about 8,000. So what is it that has changed? Is the funding which is coming from Europe is a soft diplomacy. Now, when we look at India, this is the right time today with Honorable Prime Minister who talks about globalization, who wants to be seen in a global world, who had this Study in India initiative, the Gyan initiative, but where are the numbers? I cannot quote, I met a bureaucrat in the corridors of Ministry of Education, and he said, यार हमारे पास अपने इतने numbers हैं, international students की जरूरत नहीं है. So this is the mindset, because these people, we have these islands, the good cream institutions, the IITs, where Professor Sudarsan comes from, he's ranked as number 1, few IIMs, few NITs. But what has happened in the space of 1,000 universities, we have missed on the quality. One thing, so now tell me, if I'm a European student, 18, 19, 20, 21, my government is giving me Erasmus to go and explore, but I'm not coming to India. Why? Because we want to sell our yoga and culture. That is not appealing to young Indians. And when we're talking of this knowledge divide, what I'm worried about, this is further getting divided. It's a slide. I'll give you a very good example. Being about 3 decades in the sphere of education with British Council, UN, World Bank, and now with the European Union, I've always said India students going abroad typically are 90% people going for masters, researchers, PhD, and postgrad. But you will be surprised after this COVID and after 2014-15, nothing to the government, but there's some wave in the country. The undergraduates after 12th have started leaving the country. We are talking of a young country. We are talking of a young demographic dividend, but middle class buying capacity has increased. People have started, whomsoever can afford, they are moving out. So now, but the government is not worried. We are not worried because we have a number. So we are playing on a quantity. We have not gone on quality. And government has, because I'm not surprised, because after independence, name a single government for whom education was priority number one. Education happens on its own as population in India grows on its own. These two are very, because population keeps on growing. You go to any part of the country, a poorest of the poorest person would like his son or daughter to be educated. So that's why the boom of private education, private higher education institutions. So now when we talk about the private higher education institutions, quality comes as a big, big question mark, right? Even the government is not ready to support it. So there is, it's a divide within the country. There are very few private players, like, for example, Manipal. I can easily say, not because I'm sitting with you on this program, but you have led. It's a benchmark. But how many can you count? I can really count on my fingers, the good private institutions in this country. So when we're looking at a European student coming to India, we don't have funds. I don't remember ever Ministry of External Affairs or the Indian Council of Cultural Relations or the embassies across have held education fair in Europe, taking the Indian experts. We have plethora of experts here. Even look at this panel, Professor Sudarsan, Jayaraj, Amin, Professor Shantanu. And these are the people who are the real ambassadors. But what is So we do not even take care of our own ambassadors, and these good people who go and brand you outside. So what has happened is people have gone, they have gained. So now in education domain, I always say we all are very selfish. We all have gone, got our degree, enjoyed our life. We came back, we made very good friends, through which in summertime either we are going or they are coming here. So it's a one-to-one collaboration. Now this one-to-one collaboration will never get you the European students to come to India. Another example, I was part of the UKD. Under the UKD, government spent £25,000 to give to the UK students to come to India. The program failed. We could not find institutions. Very simple thing that a UK student will come, wants to go to the bathroom, open the tap, and wants hot water. Even that we struggle for. These are very basic, similar things which we are looking at. Then, again, media has not played a very important role. Then, when we are talking of international students, unfortunately, as a marketing person, there's something called branding. India has been branded as a destination for students from Southeast Asia. So now so why have we got branded like that? Well, answer is for everyone to answer. Like you go to Delhi University, you go to Pune University. I don't blame the African students, but people are coming from Nepal. So we only have these students. You go to SARC University in Delhi, Afghani students are there only, right? So I think education has never been a priority for us. We have to still a long way to go, but it's time to seize the opportunity because India is growing right now. I think educationists like the Panellists, university, the government, we are talking of the new education policy. We have so many plans, but not a single plan is seeing the light of the day. And it's no time to blame anyone. I think even forget about anything else. We have to learn from the European Union, where Indian students were, they would, if they have to go abroad, it was US and UK. Today, right now, this year, 70,000 Indians are studying in Europe. So we have to learn from that. Whereas I remember when I joined the delegation, the moment you talk about Europe, oh no, I don't know French, I don't know German, I don't know. So they started teaching in English, and see now the Indian traffic has increased in Europe also. So we were going to UK, the Australias, the New Zealands, the Canadas of the world. Now we have made entry in Europe as well. So I think we'll come back to later on after hearing Sudarsan and Jayaraj Amin. I think it's time for us to seize the opportunity because otherwise these young Indians are leaving the country and look at the number of engineering institutes which have closed in this country. That's something which is very alarming. Over to you, Priya.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Something that you mentioned, which is about how this knowledge divide that exists is just furthering. And that is, I believe, a very worrying concern for all of us who are here and associated with higher education, the future of higher education in numerous capacities. That's one thing that's a cause of concern for all of us. Secondly, your insights that you presented has also raised this question of why this divide, why have we not able to reciprocate, which leads us to question whether is it about, let's say, tangible issues, it's about material, let's say, materialistic resources that we have lacked in order to reciprocate, or is it through the example that you presented, it's about a lack of values and interests to do so. So more intangible, let's say, tangible and intangible issues per se. We'll come to this particular insight at the end of towards the end of the panel. But now I will move on to Jayaraj sir, and I would like to bring in Professor Amin here. So when we talk about manifestation of change in the realm of knowledge, I don't think we can leave behind discussions on the relationship between knowledge and development, which is also very pertinent when we talk about India and Europe and India-EU relations itself. Both knowledge and development are interlinked, but the perception of their links, the way knowledge and development, the notions of knowledge and development are interlinked, they differ in the Indian and the European context. And this becomes even more, let's say, pertinent when we see development entering foreign policy, where if you see from a, let's say, Western or European notion, education is seen as, in the form of development, is seen as both charity. So it's differing notions on the issue of development. Maybe if you can throw us some light on that. Jayaraj, over to you.
Good evening, everybody. This is, let me at the outset thank the Center for European Studies, Monnet, for giving me this opportunity. Now, this is really wonderful opportunity for me to join a very learned kind of group. Shantanu, Sanjeev, Roy, Sudarsan, everybody here. Now, Priya has asked a very interesting question, which is partly also, I think, is related to what Shantanu and Sanjeev Roy have said. The development and knowledge. Now, for me, I would agree largely with Sanjeev Roy, but except for a few things, because Sanjeev Roy somehow appeared to me, he's putting the whole blame on India for this unidirectional kind of flow, and not giving any responsibility to the European general. But anyway, let us come back to that a little later. But for me, Shantanu's background is also something important, because when we actually talk about development and knowledge linkage, probably one also has to go back to the history to understand this linkage. Because for me, right from the beginning, there was always an imbalance in the flow of knowledge between the East and West. As scholars like Edward Said has pointed out, West has always constructed East according to its own perceptions and always had underestimated the East. Now, if you look at the large number of the Western scholars, especially of the 19th century, and in particular the German scholars, whether it's Tilse, Nietzsche, even Hegel and other people, they appreciated the Indian contribution to the philosophy and the knowledge about the other world. They always denounce India as having no contribution to the material progress. And for a large number of Western scholars, the material progress was actually very important, and the West was actually the leader of the material progress. And the same kind of an attitude, of course, was also carried during the colonial times, where in the name of or in the garb of civilizing mission, Western knowledge is always put on the top, and the other, that is the East, at the bottom. The same ideology, of course, as we all know, it was used to justify colonialism. And even after the end of the Cold War, and I think more or less the same mindset continued, because the West continued with the same sense of superiority, and its own model of development and knowledge was portrayed as the universal model of development and knowledge. Unfortunately, whether we accept it or not, more or less this kind of, thing seems to have been accepted in the East, in countries like in India. Even we have somewhere, in spite of, saying that a mixed economy, this, that, and all, we seem to have accepted the Western model of development. Of course, this has, many reasons for it. One reason, of course, is that, the underdevelopment of the East. And it was seen that the material progress only can actually, help us to get rid of all our problems. And material progress can only be achieved through the scientific knowledge that the West possessed. And secondly, of course, the West also had huge resources, which actually it could spend on education and all this kind of things, which really made which really made the developed economies like India to concentrate more on other areas and not to think more in terms of education in the initial stages. And then there is also the very close relationship between the Western countries and the funding agencies, which were again able to pump a lot of money in the education field, unlike countries like India. But more importantly, I feel also that there is an intellectual socialization of the early decision makers in countries like India, who have especially studied in Western universities and always saw West as actually the model of modernization. Now, this shaping of the knowledge and priorities right in the beginning has, in a particular direction, has actually contributed to the gap between the Western and the Eastern, say Indian knowledge building. Western advocacy of market forces and political values, like democratization or human rights, etc., interpreted in a particular way, has always served the Western interest, and now the same are actually presented the universal values. Now, you asked me about the development and knowledge linkage. Now, therefore, I would say that in the very beginning, because of lots of constraints, we were not able to focus on the developmental issues or the debate on what is development. We more or less accepted the general paradigm, because of our own compulsions or the situation at that time, and I went for this kind of things. Now, even after the end of the global, so therefore, from 1950s onwards, there was the modernization that was interpreted purely in the Western terms. Of course, this was contested very often, but I think we went actually ahead with this same kind of things. And in the 1980s, of course, we saw a radical shift in our priorities. Now, the world itself underwent change, with the end of the Cold War and subsequent importance of globalization. European advocacy of its system as universal model has gained new momentum. Now, education certainly has actually become a very powerful media to promote the European values and also to highlight the European role and presence in the world. Now, if you look at the of course, there are many documents, and including one can speak about the Maastricht Treaty and so many things. But I think the most important one is actually the EU Global Strategy of 1996, which clearly politicized the EU foreign policy by linking the European political values to the European external policy. Now, in this the linkage, visibility of the EU is stressed, and the education naturally became the instrument for EU visibility. Now, this strategy was now implemented. Once this global strategy was implemented, was formulated. Now, this strategy was implemented with a lot of vigor by European Union in all its agreement with other countries. So, in all these agreements, of course, the focus was actually on people-to-people relation and building up of civil society. And of course, education was a medium in all these things. Becomes the hallmark of all European Union agreements. Now, this trend, of course, is also visible in India-EU relations. Now, Roy has actually mentioned about the linkages between India and early linkages between India and European Union. But if you actually look at the two generations of agreements that India signed with the European Union, particularly 1973 and 1981, these did not actually insist on any political aspects. So that means we had development according to our own priorities, and the European Union, yes, definitely had the developmental agenda or development strategy, but it was not forced on us. But if you look at the third generation agreement, the so-called third generation agreement of 1994, this basically incorporates certain political values into the economic agreements. Now, the subsequent strategic partnership of 2004 and the joint action plans of 2005, etc., sought to strengthen the dialogues and people-to-people relations with a clear focus on education, among other things. Now, subsequent efforts like, the creation of, India-European Union study centers or extension of Erasmus Mundus programs to India, sought to strengthen India-European relations at the societal level. But as, earlier, panelists have already pointed out that if you look at the result in terms of size and reach, of course, the results are very encouraging. But in terms of net effect, the result is, it seems to be unidirectional. I mean, the whole pattern is unidirectional here. That is, while India and European Union studies have expanded in India, there is not significant increase in the number of European students coming to India or number of universities offering courses on India. Now, of course, here, I slightly disagree with Sanjeev Roy. That is, of course, we always blame Indian university standards and also the limited money that is spent on education. But at the same time, one cannot actually neglect that right from the beginning we were made to mentally accept the superiority of the Western education, the scientific temper and things of this kind, which probably had impacted our educational values right from the beginning. And this is probably one reason as to why we have actually lagged behind in raising to the global standards in terms of the scientific education or the material education, etc. Now, of course, this imbalance is being corrected now, and there has been a focus on indigenous basis of knowledge. Of course, this does not mean that we are psychologically closing our borders. But what is important in the whole debate is that we are now in a position not to accept the Western prescription blindly. Of course, Europe is using education as an instrument of soft power diplomacy to increase its visibility, and India is offering alternatives and coming out with proposals and programs to that effect. That is, if you look at the whole European Indian kind of relations in terms of knowledge, also like in other areas, we are actually moving away from the donor-recipient kind of relationship to one that of partnership. Now, in the whole scheme, there could be a lot of give and take, and the interest of both could be aligned, and the larger interest of the education could be served here. So therefore, if you look at the linkage between development and knowledge, I would say that yes, in the beginning, we did not actually give priority to our own educational requirements or the societal requirements. We blindly accepted this thing. But now there is a shift in terms of focus, and we are trying to actually overcome our deficiency and see that the education in this country is actually shaped according to our the priorities of our society. So of course Europe may not like it, because Europe would still say that you accept what is given to you by us, but then we are saying no, we also have our own positions, and we will stand by that. So in terms of development perspectives, yes, even in education we have some sort of differences, but that differences are not too great to come in the way of good relation between the two countries. Yes, priorities are different. So because our educational priorities, say for instance, if you look at the educational priorities of European Union in many of the treaties, what it says is that okay, you actually structure your society in such a way that there is a democratization, there is a respect for rule of law, things of this kind, and ultimately what happens, the governance system has to be promoted. And why governance? So that you can actually link yourself to the global economy in a very better manner. Now that is actually the Western kind of an understanding, whereas we would say that our priority is not to actually link our economy in the West, because we have large middle class or young population, and giving them the jobs probably is our priority, and not linking with the linking blindly with the global economy. So here we have some differences as to what actually development means, and what is the impact of that development on our society, and how education should be actually pushed in this regard. I think I'll stop here. We'll take up.
Well, it's interesting to see our panel members disagreeing with each other, and I'll give you the floor to disagree with each other towards the end. And interesting that Jayaraj, sir, you brought in the issue or the emergence of funding agencies and the kind of, and these agencies and these actors are of course very pertinent in today's times, as they lead us to the discussion on the question of legitimacy. And that takes me to our, let's say, final panelist here. I'll come to Sudarsan sir now. Something that Shantanu sir also stressed when he spoke about how knowledge is power-centric in nature, in the sense that knowledge is interlinked with power. And just as scholars have argued that just as power requires legitimation, similarly, knowledge also requires legitimation, which brings us to the topic of politics of recognition. So which knowledge is it that matters, and whose knowledge is it that is worthy? So Sudarsan sir, if you can throw some light on this entire debate on the politics of recognition when it comes to knowledge. Over to you, Sudarsan.
Thank you, Priya, and nice to see Dr. Roy, and, Professor Shantanu, and Professor Amin. Hopefully, we'll be able to meet soon and in person and discuss the much broader forum. Thanks, Priya. This is an excellent topic. So I just want to start with an aside. See, in the morning session, Professor Patwardhan was talking about how the cosmopolitan has to be balanced with the vernacular, and also in terms of pedagogy, rethinking of pedagogy, looking inward, and also not closing our minds, expanding our horizons in a much more holistic and integrated fashion. He was discussing that in a very, very elaborate fashion. Then Mr. Joshi was talking about how the international organizations, once again, cosmopolitan international organizations, are helping especially underprivileged societies and underserved people to kind of integrate what Professor Amin was talking about, integrate, especially in terms of global technologies like internet and other things, and also how they were ensuring, especially during pandemic times, that the sustainability and inclusivity and also equitability was not sacrificed in the altar of development. And as usual, Professor Butt, Dr. Butt was in his elements, and he talked very succinctly about how the regional has to be the main focus now to kind of create linkages, whereas we are concentrating more on international now. And also I would like to go a little bit one step lower, in the sense that we have the international, regional, and also local. So now the linkages have to be between local, regional, and international, and the private-public partnership, and expanding the educational base in terms of universities, more private universities, more public universities. And this becomes very extremely important. The emphasis on regional and how the European Union grew was extremely important, because European Union also had these identity issues. And I think Dr. Roy was mentioning about Eastern Europe and how it became 27 countries, and Dr. Shantanu was also talking about how the Eastern Europe was not part of the Indian imaginary in terms of engagement. Then finally, Dr. Venkatesh, the Vice Chancellor, was also talking about the balance, striking a balance between quality and quantity, and how the vision is to actually take this forward. The internationalization has to be also one of not only quantity but also quality. And the speakers earlier also referred to the challenges in terms of number of universities that are sustainable, number of colleges that are sustainable. And people start colleges and universities, but they are not able to sustain themselves. And what happens is that, as Dr. Roy mentioned, the number of universities increase and suddenly they fold. That means they are supposed to provide education, quality education, for people from various levels, right? Socio-political, socio-economic backgrounds. Then if the universities start folding, then what happens? It's back to square one, right? So you, as the population increases, you need catchment areas to be the universities. But that kind of happens. So that means there is a socio-economic upheaval. And you are going to leave a huge number of young people without proper degrees and proper education. So questions of equity, inclusivity, and also sustainability becomes a major issue. And I'll give you a very simple example, which is kind of slightly, not serious example. I just want to show how faculty and students are very similar in the ways, because as Professor Patwardhan was saying, faculty have to learn from students. Probably they are. I'll give you an example. This was probably in 2014. I think Shantanu was there. Amin was also there. In Symbiosis Institute in Pune, there was a vice chancellor who said that I will not send my students nor my faculty to international universities. So Professor Padmanabhan was mentioning about 800 universities under vice chancellors. This vice chancellor had 200 universities under him. So myself and Professor Jyotirmaya Tripathi had a very heated argument with this vice chancellor, but he did not budge. But when someone says that internationalization is not needed, then how are you going to convince him? Okay, that was the first issue for us. We didn't convince him, and anyway, we parted not as friends anyway. So, and the second example was from IIT Madras. I was a faculty advisor for international relations. My boss was the dean, and we had a meeting of head of the departments and senior professors. So there was this one senior professor who said that we don't need internationalization. You are sitting in an international dean's committee meeting, and then you are saying no internationalization, we don't need it. Then my dean was actually a very, very even-keeled person, very, very soft-spoken, and he doesn't get irritated a lot. I get irritated very fast, but he doesn't. But then I saw him was sitting right next to him, and like steam was coming out of his ears. Then how do you convince senior professors at IIT Madras? In this case, only one person, not too many. So this is not symptomatic of bigger malaise. And this person was saying, I told him, so where do you get the term engineering? He said, yeah, I know about all those things, about technology, everything came from Greece and Rome and everything else. We are borrowing everything. All your textbooks, where are they coming from? I know about all those things. But still, why do you need internationalization? Then the government actually, this current government actually came up with a very interesting solution, right? See, if a student in a class does not listen, let us say there are 50 students in a class, they don't listen to you. What do? You have one Brahmastra, right? Whatever I'm teaching today is going to be in the exams, right? So once you say that, all the students will shut up and they will rapt attention to whatever you are saying or not saying. Then suddenly what happened, the government said, we are going to have rankings. And all these things you have to do, and the rank, otherwise your ranking is gone. So all the faculty, vice chancellors, everybody started following choice-based credit system, internationalization, and then all harmonizing that Professor Bhatt was talking about was done in one fell swoop. So everything was gone. Now once you say ranking, from directors, vice chancellors, everybody is in the same place. Right? So for 25, 30 years, we were talking about choice-based credit system, credit transfers, matching the syllabus and all kinds of things. But in one year, within 1 year, everything was done. Okay, it's still not done, but at least in principle, these were done. Why I'm saying is that we all need some kind of carrot and stick approach to get our act together. Jokes aside, knowledge is power, and knowledge is also extremely cosmopolitan. Knowledge is dynamic, and if you look at it, this question of knowledge is power versus knowledge as an emancipatory tool has always been there from the Socratic days, or you can from Romans or Indian, ancient Indian systems, Egyptian. You take any system for that matter, Zoroastrians. See that knowledge was always power plus also knowledge. That was always a worry for any philosopher or politician or anybody. And famously, General Dwight Eisenhower said that. About military-industrial complex. See, that is what it is, right? Knowledge and power coming together is military-industrial complex. Today, if you look at China or India or European Union to a lesser extent, and you look at any country in the world that has money and power and size, they all want military-industrial complex. So power is actually what drives most of these things. But education is supposed to provide something slightly more than that. Which kind of makes us yearn for some kind of knowledge, wisdom. And that has always been the conundrum from Socrates to, Einstein or anybody else. Because Einstein was part of the Manhattan Project, but all these scientists were thrown aside and then the military took over. So the notion of identity, I think European Union in some sense has been extremely fair, because we did this IBIS project. Manipal, then Calcutta University and Mangalore, we were all part of this IBIS project, where they ensured that there was representation from all segments, for example, private, public institutions, colleges, and then you also ensured that people from tribal areas, women. So it was ensured that this kind of representation also happens. Then the Indian government also insisted that some kind of an affirmative action should also be followed. So in that sense, this question about knowledge representation, and also in terms of whose knowledge, what knowledge is actually a conundrum that nobody can answer. But if we create some kind of democratic and dialogical environment where there is open dialogue, where people can have free and fair exchange of ideas, and also somebody mentioned empathy. I think Manish Joshi mentioned empathy. So we also need to have empathy in terms of people who are less privileged, not in terms of epistemological arrogance or something or hubris, but we also need to have this really empathy, which is extremely important. I think most of the organizations, look at Europe, European Union, UNICEF, UNDP, many of these organizations have always been working on this model. And somebody mentioned Gandhi's, I think in one of the other meetings, somebody mentioned Gandhi's impact on sustainable development goals. And so his famous talisman that if you are going to come up with a public policy, you have to think of how it's going to benefit the person, the last person on the rung, or the last rung of the ladder. So that is actually in many ways characterized, the approaches of UN and many other multilateral organizations. And I think we should also at an organizational level think about various things that way. But at a much more granular level and individual level, it is actually a constant negotiation and contestation that we should be open to. Because if we are set in our ways and we don't engage with the other, that means we cannot have a meaningful conversation, and also we will not change our views about things, and we'll be always working on stereotypes and prejudices. So if we have to really engage meaningfully and also in terms of knowledge, remove this kind of preconceived notions and also prejudices, we need to have this empathy plus a dialogical environment and free fair exchange of ideas. And I think most of the multilateral organizations are working within a lot of constraints, because ultimately nation states are the units, and they don't have the veto over nation states. So in that sense, it is an extremely tough situation, challenging situation. I think, as Immanuel Kant said, that the nation states have to become more ethical and also manage their affairs much better. And probably if that happens, there's no need for an UN or other organizations to basically manage the affairs of these nation states. I will rest with this because this is a huge topic, and then the philosophical discussions are extremely deep and broad. Thank you, Priya.
Thank you so much, Sudarshan sir. One thing that you really emphasized here was as also something I found was very profound, was the fact that knowledge needs to move beyond these power-centric discussions. I think that's the only way or that could be probably one of the, let's say, ways ahead to counter this knowledge divide, which brings me to the last, let's say, question that I would like to throw at all my panel members here. Very quickly, if we can reiterate once again, what's the way forward? Is there an effective way to counter, if there are any solutions, let's say, because we've discussed in this panel, especially we've discussed in depth on the kind of knowledge divide that exists between these two regions. But what's the, let's say, counter strategy or counter solution to this entire problem that exists? So very quickly, in 2 minutes, maybe 1 or 2 minutes, if you can quickly give your insights on what you think about this. I'll leave it to you to start. Because I see that there already seems to be disagreements, where Mr. Roy says that probably we have not done enough. India has not done enough to try and bridge this gap. And we have Jayaraj saying that, no, it's not really a problem. So maybe we could start with both of you. One of you could take this discussion ahead, and then I can move to the Sudarshan sir and Shantanu. Yes, Jayaraj sir and Sanjeev.
Yes, I think, what is the way forward? I think, and I would just mention these things in the last para. That as we actually move towards the partnership, that partnership has to actually become, has to be based on proper equality and appreciation of each other's concerns, or and have some certain amount of sensitivity. I think based on that, I think we can actually move forward. But what is if somebody is expecting that they should actually say something and others have to just blindly accept, I think India definitely has moved beyond that kind of position, and says that no, we are not going to accept. So what for me is probably is important in any kind of, these things, as Sudarshan said, it should be a dialogic, and it should be based on equality. There should be certain amount of sensitivity. There should be, appreciation of, each other's concerns.
Thank you so much, Jayaraj. Sanjeev, over to you. Would you like to respond?
Okay, first of all, as an Indian, Professor Jayaraj, Amin, and we are on the same plate because both of us want India to develop. It's so I was addressing the question literally, the knowledge divide and the slide between India and Europe, mobility of scholars. But I totally agree with whatever Professor Jayaraj Amin has said, because as an Indian, we all are passionate and we want our own country to now become the Vishwaguru, which we're talking about. We had the Nalanda, we had Chinese travelers coming to India. So what is it that over the years where we have developed? So as he very rightly said, even I agree, and overall, we are now getting our gear right. But education has never been a priority for this country. That's number one. Number two, what in your question, which you had asked me as a knowledge divide, what was not addressed was India is a diverse country. We have to look at equity as well. So their students in the village have nothing to do with internationalization. They want an education to get them a skill and get them a job in India. So the population which is looking at internationalization, maybe maximum would be, I would say, 20 to 25 lakh students. That's it. So that is not India. So coming back to the question, I think it's time as higher education institutions, the government needs to embrace the public and the private, the state and the government. We have a lot of resources which are sitting in our own individuals. We need to make that common for everyone.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Sudarshan sir, Shantanu, either of you wish to go ahead?
Actually, yeah, I think I agree with Dr. Roy and Professor Amin as well, because see, dialogue and sensitivity and consensus and partnership, these are extremely difficult things to achieve because we can talk purely in terms of formal words, but putting them into practice needs a lot of work on both sides. And remember, 10 years ago in same Manipal, probably in the same venue, there was a discussion about getting visas and how to convert grades and all those fiasco, and how many universities were even ready to accept the grades. Now this CBCS credit-based, choice-based credit system is kind of integrated. So that also is because of this kind of a symbiotic approach between both the sides. So the secretary was not ready to do that. Now you see a completely huge change. But so that means both sides have to work together. Plus, as Dr. Roy pointed out, the problems in India, we have to address. The European Union cannot address those things. Internationalization is not a solution for addressing local problems. That is on us. As Lord Meghnad Desai once mentioned in a TV program, the TV anchor was very outraged that we are following British system, these and all those things. And Lord Meghnad Rai asked her, who asked you to follow it? Then she had no answer. There was she just was total silence. So that's what I'm asking. Who asked us to follow these things? We have brains. The Africans are doing it. So let us find our own way. That doesn't mean that we have to shun. As Gandhi said, you don't have to be swept up by your feet. You don't have to wall everything. So we have our own brains. We have tradition. We have culture. We are also open to other influences. But we need to have a sense of Swaraj. And I just end with that Gandhian thought. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Shantanu sir, quickly.
Yeah. Let me share two stories. As Mr. Roy rightly mentioned, India's could have taken more initiative. I will just point out where we are lacking. In 2016, one of my own colleagues from my university was appointed as India chair at this university called MRU, Mykolas Romaris University in Lithuania. His task was to build up a Study India center there. Now, 2016, I was traveling in Warsaw, so I visited him when he had joined, 2 months ago. I literally saw him sitting in a small room, desperately trying to seek help. There is no Indian embassy in Lithuania. The Indian embassy in Poland, acts as an embassy for Lithuania also. So he was waiting for his salary transfer. He was waiting for books. To have the study center, you need some books. 2018, I had visited him again. By that time, the India Center, which was, he was there for 5 years to build up that center. By that time, he had been, you had around 20, 25 books transferred by the Indian embassy to that center. And to my surprise, that India Center had been transformed into an Asia Center, Asia Study Center. The books on India were, of course, there, but there were more books on China and on Japan. So I asked him what has happened. He said, the Chinese ambassador here and the Japanese ambassador persuaded the university that why don't you introduce these sort of study centers? We are going to fund you special courses. We could arrange for mutual student and faculty level exchange. And so the Indian Center was transformed into an Asian Center. This is one example. How our approach lacks. Whereas, and as an alternative example, if you offer the facilities which Mr. Roy was talking about, even if there are problems related to your own clash of culture or clash of value systems, you are willing to go there. You see the number of European students going to various Chinese universities, or leave around Chinese universities. You just see the number of European students in Turkish universities or even in Iran. I met, I had an interesting chat with one student from Warsaw University. She had, they have an exchange program with Tehran University. Now, she knew she had to wear a hijab in public places and all that, but still she was willing to go there. She landed up there, and in Tehran University, you would be given a temporary student card. As it happened, she had taken her photograph for that student ID card back in Warsaw, where she was not required to wear a hijab, and she had pasted it on that student ID card. Now, while landing up in Tehran, she found out, no, this wouldn't do, because your picture on your student ID card is a picture without a hijab. She had to retake another picture there locally and then do it. But still, when I asked them, so, were you bitter? Did you fight? He said, no. Otherwise, I like, they had all other facilities, okay, and then those were fascinating people. So, I guess, and we, I guess, everyone here in the panel would agree that we are also fascinating people, at least most of us. So, if we just take we don't even need to go that extra mile.
They're
if we
probably
go a few yards, that would be fascinating. Alternatively, as Sudarsan and Jayaraj pointed out, when you look at European Union, I guess, European Union is going to face an identity crisis in the coming, years, which is going to affect its education policy also. I mean, I was in another panel where I learned that the UK universities are now out of the Erasmus Mundus system. Now, if you leave UK out, how many number of Indian students would go there? And if you go to some of these smaller European universities located in places like Slovenia, Lithuania, Poland, you can virtually see the clamor for foreign students who could pay for their own course. And you have a large number of students coming in from affluent Afghan families, Iraq, Turkey, etc. So, in case of India, Indian students, they might sense, is it is perhaps one reason why they are not so much eager to go to Europe is, first of all, this is an entire new generation. Unlike us or the generation before us, they do not really have that, fascination for Europe as much. Second is these private universities are setting up bases, campuses in whichever country, in many foreign countries, which, Manipal has started doing it much earlier. I don't know whether any European country has still allowed any of these Indian private universities to set up their campus there. I guess that's one way in which, because they sense an opportunity, because many of these Indian students would try and go to some of these private universities, setting up their campus there, because one reason why a lot of students are going there is that you would be, you would spend one semester abroad. It doesn't matter if it's not in UK. It does, they are perfectly okay with a with a place like Bangkok or Singapore. And another reason might be because of the large number of Indian expatriates. If you look at the large number of Indians today in West Asia or Southeast Asia, these campuses might be more willing to set up campuses in these areas, which in turn is going to create a natural interest for Indian students going to study there. So even though the number of Indian students trying to go abroad, I mean, there are, I think, currently already 750,000. My guess is that they would be venturing into these new areas. We have already seen decline of US, which used to be the second destination. It has gone down to 4th position. And you have emergence of new areas which are emerging as destinations. My guess is that it's not that Indian students are not going abroad, but to them, European Union or as such does no longer carries this fascination as it used to be perhaps 5 or 10 or 15 years earlier.
Thank you so much, Shantanu. So challenges to counter this knowledge divide is numerous, is what we get from all the panel members. Of course, in the next, to counter this knowledge divide is, I think, also very essential for all of us, since all of us are in some ways, because we are also associated with higher education, with knowledge production, dissemination, and consumption, and we either resist this entire divide, or of course contest, or probably some way contribute to fighting this entire, let's say, knowledge divide that exists. And with this, let me conclude the panel. Unfortunately, that we have to conclude it soon because we have another session lined up. That's the last session for the entire day. But let me thank all my panel members for such a wonderful and very engaging discussion. And I'm sure that probably there's an opportunity in the future to discuss and deliberate all these issues, very fundamental, crucial issues to all of us physically sometime in the future. So thank you very much, Mr. Sanjeev Roy, Sudarsan sir, Jayaraj sir, and Shantanu sir for joining us.
See you all. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Wishing everyone a very nice evening.
You too.
Thank you. Same to you.